The morning after the rain, a black SUV came to a hard stop in front of Walker's diner, and Silas Walker felt the silence in his chest before the first car door opened. Through the wide front window, he watched a woman in a long dark coat step down onto the wet asphalt. Her heels caught the gray light. Her hair, the color of dark chestnut, fell loose over one shoulder. Behind her, two officers in uniform climbed out, and Silas understood, with a calm sort of sorrow, that they had not come for coffee. He set down the cup he had been drying. He did not run to the back room. He did not hide anything. He simply turned the small radio off, smoothed his hand once across the apron tied at his waist, and waited. The woman in the dark coat pushed the door open without ceremony. She did not say good morning. Her eyes scanned the room, once, fast, and then settled on Silas with the steadiness of a hammer. "Where is my sister?" she asked. Silas did not flinch. "She is in the back," he said. "She is safe. She had a bowl of soup an hour ago. She is awake." Vivian Hartwell, 28 years old and the chief executive of Hartwell Meridian Hotels, did not soften. If anything, the answer made her sharper. She turned to the officer on her right. "This man held a 15-year-old girl overnight," she said, without notifying her legal guardian. The younger officer, Dante Brooks, glanced at Silas with the kind of suspicion a small-town policeman learns young. A single man. A roadside dinner. A teenage girl who had not been seen since the previous night. He had read enough reports to know how those 3 sentences could end. But Silas did not raise his voice. He did not begin a defense. He stood behind his counter in a clean white shirt and a faded apron, his hands open at his sides, and he answered without any heat at all. "She walked in here close to midnight," he said. "Saw it through. Shivering. No phone. No money. No coat. I could not put a child back out into freezing rain at her age." Vivian's face did not move. Her own father had taught her, before he died, that the world looked at the Hartwell name and saw a price tag. "Men like you," she said, "always have a story ready. Maybe you wanted to be a hero. Maybe you wanted a quiet check from a worried family." Silas had learned long ago that anger never saved anyone. He had been the man on the side of a wet road 3 years before, watching another set of headlights pass without stopping, while his wife waited in a totaled car for an ambulance that came too late. He simply looked at Vivian Hartwell and said nothing. It was then that the door at the back of the diner opened a crack, just enough for a girl's pale face to appear in the gap. Adelaide Hartwell, 15 years old, stood in the warm dimness, wrapped in an oversized work coat that was clearly not hers, holding a chipped mug with both hands. When she saw her sister, she took half a step backward. That small backward step was the first true word spoken in the room. To understand how the diner had reached that morning, one had to go back to the night before, when the wind off the highway had been so loud it pressed against the diner windows like a second customer. The rain had begun a little after 8. By 11 the last regular had eaten his pie, paid in singles, and pulled his rain hat low over his ears as he stepped out into the dark. Walker's diner sat alone on a curve of 2-lane road in western Pennsylvania, between a closed gas station and an empty grain silo. Inside, the light was warm and yellow. Red vinyl boots, scuffed at the edges, lined one wall. A long counter, polished by years of elbows, ran the length of the kitchen. The smell of chicken soup and butter and old coffee hung soft in the air, the way it always did after closing. Silas moved through his closing routine the way he moved through every night. He wrapped a slice of pecan pie in foil for a trucker who might come tomorrow. Digo where God. He checked the gas valves twice. He wiped down the counter with a folded towel until it caught the lamplight. Each small action was its own kind of prayer, the kind a man learns when he has lost too much to trust loved ones. Behind the kitchen, in a small back room that had once been a storage closet, his daughter slept. Gwen Walker, 6 years old, lay curled on a narrow bed beneath a quilt her mother had once chosen for her crib. In her arms, she held a brown stuffed rabbit named Milo, whose left ear was sewn back on with thread that did not quite match. The rabbit had been her mother's last gift, wrapped with shaking hands the week before the accident. Gwen took it everywhere, and she did not let strangers touch it. He had been a chef once, in a tall hotel in Chicago, with white tablecloths and a wine list. Then a sedan had spun on black ice on a January night, and the world had asked him a different question. He had answered it by selling almost everything, taking his daughter, and driving east until he found a closed diner with a hand-lettered sign in the window. He had reopened it 3 months later. He had not looked back. Around 11:30, Gwen padded out into the diner in her pajamas, dragging Milo by one paw. The rain on the windows was loud enough to wake her. She rubbed one eye with a small fist and looked up at her father. "Are we sleeping here again tonight?" she asked. Silas crouched down, so their faces were level. He smoothed her hair back with the same steady hand he used for everything. "Yes," he said. "But here is our home too, isn't it?" She nodded, slow and serious. Then she frowned, the way she frowned only when a question had been gathering in her for a long time. "Does Mommy know our home is here?" she asked. Silas closed his eyes for a moment. The rain answered before he did. "Mommy knows," he said. "She knows that wherever there is a warm light, that is where I will keep you safe." It was a few minutes after midnight when the bell over the door rang. The girl who stepped inside did not look like the kind of person who walked into roadside diners at midnight. Her sweater was wet through, but it was good wool, the kind that came from a store that did not put prices in the window. Her shoes were ruined, but they had once cost more than Silas earned in a week. She had no bag. She had no phone. Her hands were empty and red with cold, and she kept looking back at the door behind her as if she expected it to open again any second. Silas did not move toward her. He had been taught, by a daughter and by a wife, that a frightened child does not need a man to come close. He set a clean towel on the counter where she could reach it. He poured a mug of warm water and slid it across the polished wood, and he stayed on his side of the counter. "You can take the towel," he said. "And the water." Her eyes flicked to him, then to the towel, then back to the door. "Is anyone after you?" he asked, gently. She shook her head. "A small leak, perhaps. A real fear, certainly." "Are you hurt?" She shook her head again. "Did anyone hit you?" She paused longer this time. The pause was its own answer, even before the words. "No one hit me," she said. Silas waited. But they would not let me breathe. He did not ask her what she meant. He understood the difference between a bruise on the skin and a bruise on a day. He nodded once slowly, and asked her name. "Adelaide," she said. "How old are you, Adelaide? 15? The word 15 settled in the room like a stone in a pond. A teenage girl, a single man, a closed diner past midnight, no witnesses. He had seen what a sentence like that could do to a man, even an innocent one. He did not let his face change. "Where are your parents, Adelaide?" "My father died. My mother is not in my life. My guardian is my sister." "What is your sister's name?" "Vivian Hartwell." Silas knew the name. Anyone who lived within 100 miles of a Hartwell meridian and read a billboard knew the name. He understood, in that quiet second, that he had not stumbled into a runaway story. He had stepped into something that came with attorneys and headlines, and a long bright corridor of consequences. He took a slow breath. He could call the police now and hand her off, and the night would be safe for him. He could send her back into the rain with a sandwich and pretend she had never been there. But Adelaide was shivering hard enough now that the mug shook in her hands. The skin under her eyes was so thin it looked bruised. He recognized the look of someone who had been holding herself up alone too long. He picked up his phone. He did not call the police. He sent a single text message to a woman named Irene Caldwell, a night nurse he had known since the diner first opened. "A teenage girl just walked in out of the storm," he wrote. "She is safe. I do not know her family situation yet. I will keep her here through the morning and call for help at first light. I want a witness. Please, save this message. The reply came within a minute. Saved. Stay calm. Camera, onto. Silas put the phone face up on the counter, where Adelaide could see it. It told her exactly what he had written. It told her he would not lie to anyone. It told her that he could not hide her from her guardian, but that for tonight she could sit by the heater, eat warm soup, and not be afraid of one more adult in this room. She did not speak. But her shoulders dropped a small, slow inch. It was the first time in many hours that her body had remembered how to rest. A few minutes later, the back door creaked again, and Gwen padded into the dining room, dragging Milo by his stitched paw. She had heard a voice that did not belong to her father, and curiosity had won over sleep. Silas then said at once, not because Gwen was in danger, but because he did not want a 6-year-old to carry the shape of this night into her dreams. But Gwen had already seen Adelaide. And Gwen, who did not yet know the world had teeth, did not ask who she was. Are you cold? She asked instead. Adelaide tried to smile. The corners of her mouth moved, but her eyes filled, and the smile shook in the middle and could not stand. Without a word, Gwen turned, walked back to her room, and returned with the smaller of her 2 blankets. It was pink and worn and patterned with little gray clouds. She offered it to Adelaide with both arms held out, the way a child offers what a child believes is the entire kingdom. Silas almost stopped her. Here. But he did not. One child was giving a blanket to another child. That was not a complication. That was the simplest sentence in the room. Gwen sat down on the stool beside her father and watched Adelaide eat the soup he had warmed. Is anyone coming to pick you up? She asked, finally. Adelaide lowered her spoon. The question had been kinder than any question her sister's attorneys had ever asked her. There were many people in her life who managed her. There were very few people who picked her up. My sister, she said, after a long moment. She will come, eventually. Is she nice? Adelaide did not answer at first. She tried to find the right word, and the word she found was not a word a child would understand. She is busy, she said. Gwen considered this. Very. Then she asked the question that turned out to be the one that mattered. Does she let you choose what you eat? Adelaide laughed, very softly, and then almost cried, because the question was so small and so exactly right. In the long ledger of her life, even the small choices had not really been hers. The girl on the stool had asked the truest question in 3 years, and she had not even meant to. Silas told Gwen gently to go back to bed. Before she left, Gwen set Milo on the counter near Adelaide for a moment, as if to lend her a little courage. Then she remembered that Milo was the last thing her mother had touched, and she scooped him back up into her arms and carried him away. She was kind, but she was still 6. She had given what she could. She had kept what she needed. The diner was quiet again. The rain went on. Silas sat down across from Adelaide, 2 stools away, and folded his hands on the counter. You can stay here, he said. I will not turn you out into a storm. But I will not lie for you either. I will not turn off my cameras. I will not lock the door of the room you sleep in. I will not pretend you are not here. In the morning, I am going to call someone with the right authority to help you, and I am going to do it with you in the room. That is the only way I can do this. Adelaide had not expected an adult to draw a clean line in front of her without raising a voice. Silas spoke like a man who had decided long ago that fairness and kindness were the same word. My sister will be furious, she whispered. Maybe. Has your sister ever hit you? No. Has she ever locked you in a room? Starved you? Insulted you in front of others? No. Then what is she doing? He asked, as the gentlest possible permission to be heard. Adelaide stared at her cooling soup. She does not have to lock the doors, she said. She just makes sure every door has someone standing at it. Silas did not respond right away. He understood, in that single sentence, the whole shape of the thing she had been carrying. Whatever this was, it was not loud. That was what made it harder to name. He stood up, slowly. He showed her the back room, where she could rest. He did not enter the room. He set a fresh bowl of soup, a slice of buttered toast, and an old work coat on the floor in the doorway, and he stepped backward. "The door does not lock from this side," he said. "The hallway camera will keep running. Gwen sleeps 2 doors down. I will be at the counter. If you need anything, you do not have to be polite about it." Adelaide looked at the open door for a long moment. Then she stepped inside, lifted the bowl from the floor, and carried it to the small table by the bed. The door, behind her, did not close all the way. Silas walked back to the front of the diner. He sat down on a worn red stool. He did not sleep. He drank cold coffee. He watched the rain blur the parking lot until the parking lot became a dark mirror of the sky. He thought of his wife. He thought of the night she had died, when no one had stopped on a wet shoulder of road for the woman he loved. He could not undo that night. He could only refuse, every night after, to be the man who drove past. By the time the first gray stripe of light slid under the diner door, he had made his decision 100 times, and the decision had not changed. That decision was waiting for him when Vivian Hartwell stepped into his diner with 2 officers at her back. Vivian saw the step backward Adelaide had taken, and the step did something to her she could not quite explain. She corrected herself, instantly, the way she had been trained to correct her face in front of a hostile board. But her voice, when she spoke again, came out a degree colder, because the cold was the only place she felt safe. "Adelaide," she said. "Come here." "Now, pen." Officer Oliver Hayes, who had stood quiet by the door, stepped forward. He was a man in his early 40s with gray at the temples and the calm eyes of someone who had seen too many family disputes pretend to be crimes. He held up one slow hand. "Ma'am," he said, with respect, "we will hear everyone, one at a time." Vivian turned on him. She was not used to being called ma'am with that flat, courteous patience. In her world, she gave the meeting its rhythm. Here, in a small diner with cracked floor tile, someone else held the timing. She took a measured breath. She produced her credentials. She named her attorneys. She said the words legal guardian 3 times in 2 sentences. She said Adelaide had a documented history of anxiety. She said she had a treatment plan. Every word was true. Every word was also a leash. Officer Brooks turned to Silas. "Why didn't you call us last night, sir?" It was the question Silas had been waiting for. He answered, without rehearsal. "Because when she walked in, she did not need another adult giving orders," he said. "She needed to get warm. She needed to stop shaking. She needed to hear that she was safe. I planned to call as soon as she could speak clearly. I did not want to scare her into a story she had not chosen." Vivian laughed, one short, dry sound. "How convenient," she said. "A roadside diner. A struggling man. A wealthy family. You know who my sister is. You know what we can pay to make a story go away." The blood did not rise in Silas' face. He had been called worse things than opportunist by people who had less reason to be afraid. He looked at her steadily. "I know she walked in here cold," he said. Last night, that was the only thing that mattered. A few of his regulars had drifted in for coffee and now stood frozen by the door, holding paper cups. He saw, in their faces, the thing that scared him most. If the word kidnapping stuck to Walker's diner, no court ruling would clean it off. He could lose his customers. He could lose his diner. He could, in a worse hour, lose the right to raise his own daughter. He held his hands open at his sides. He did not look away from Vivian. "Ask your sister why she ran," he said, quietly. "Before you ask anything else, ask her that." Officer Ace asked Adelaide to step out from the back. She did. She still wore Silas' old work coat. To Vivian, the coat was an insult. To Hayes, it was simply a piece of cloth on a girl who had been cold. He asked her, gently, if she had come to the diner of her own choice. Yes. He asked her if Silas had taken her, lured her, threatened her, or kept her against her will. No me nasi. He told me, very clearly, that he would call for help in the morning. He said he could not hide me. He never closed the door. He asked her why she had not called Vivian. She did not answer at first. Vivian filled the silence almost too quickly. Adelaide has a treatment plan, she said. She has an anxiety diagnosis. Sometimes she misreads her own situation. We have specialists who can speak to this. It was the kind of sentence a board hears and accepts and moves past. Eyes did not move past it. Let her answer, please. Adelaide swallowed. She looked at her sister's expensive shoes. She looked at the worn red boots. She looked, finally, at Silas, and something in his quiet face gave her permission to use a voice that was actually hers. I did not call you, she said, because if I called you, you would have sent the driver. If I had not gotten in the car, you would have called the doctor. If I had cried, you would have written it in a file. If I had said, I did not want to come home, you would have said I was losing control. Vivian's face went still. I gave you everything, she said. Her voice was even. It was a list. The best school, the best therapist, a driver, security, a future. What is missing, Adelaide? Tell me, what is missing? What is missing? Adelaide's eyes filled. She did not yell. She did not throw anything. She simply spoke, and her voice was small, and the small was what made it terrible. What is missing, she said, is one day where I am not being reported on. The diner went silent in the way rooms only go silent after a true sentence. The old soda cooler hummed. The rain dripped from the gutter outside. No one moved. Vivian stared at her sister, as if seeing a stranger she had been raising for years. The careful structures of her life, the doctors, the drivers, the calendar in 3 colors, the thoughtful and expensive cage she had built around the only person left in her family, all of it shimmered for 1 second and refused to shimmer back into place. Silas did not speak. He understood that this moment was not his. He looked, instead, at the back room, where his own daughter stood half hidden by the doorway with Milo pressed against her cheek. Gwen had been listening longer than her father knew. She had heard Vivian use a sharp word about him. She had heard a strange woman call her father a man who took children. To a 6-year-old who had only ever seen her father carry sleepy customers' coats to their cars and refill the same trucker's coffee for free, the word did not fit, and she could not let it stand. She walked out from the back room. Silas turned, his hand half lifting in a small, fatherly no, but he stopped himself. He saw her face. She was not afraid. She was simply certain. Ellie let her come. She stopped a few feet from the strange woman in the long coat. She held Milo by both ears, the way she always held him when she was being brave. My daddy did not take anybody, she said. No one in the room spoke. She took one more breath, the way small children do when a thought is bigger than the air in their chest. He just did not let her be cold. Vivian Hartwell had built her career on reading rooms. She had stood in front of investors who had wanted to dismantle her father's company, and she had not blinked. But she could not seem to find a place to put a sentence from a 6-year-old in a pink pajama top who held a stuffed rabbit with one mismatched ear. For the first time since stepping out of the SUV, she actually saw the diner. She saw a child's blanket folded on a back booth. She saw a small framed photograph of a woman through the half-open door of a back room. She saw a single father's apron, washed too many times, on a hook by the kitchen. The picture in front of her stopped looking like the place where a man hid a girl. It started looking like the place where a man tried, every day, to keep 2 children from being any colder than they already were. Gwen, who did not understand any of this, only added what she remembered. When my mommy died, she said, Daddy said no one should ever be alone in the rain. Silas closed his eyes for one short private second. The line was his. He had said it, once, on a porch in late winter, to himself. He had not realized she had been listening. Vivian found herself remembering the night her own father had died. She had been 25. She had become, in a single hospital corridor, the oldest person in her family. She had decided, that same night, that she would never lose anyone again. She had kept that promise the only way she knew how. She had built fences. She had hired guards. She had turned love into a system, because a system was something she could control. Officer Brooks, who had walked in with his suspicion already drawn like a tool from a belt, lowered it now. He asked, quietly, if Silas had cameras. Silas said yes. He led the officers behind the counter. He pulled the recordings on a small monitor older than his daughter. The first clip showed Adelaide stepping into the diner alone, just past midnight, soaked and shivering. Silas stayed behind the counter the entire time. He did not touch her. He did not lock the door. He poured water. He set down a towel. He kept the distance of a careful adult who knew exactly how every frame might one day be read. A second clip from the back hallway showed Adelaide walking, by herself, into the back room. The door did not close all the way. Silas never entered. He sat at the counter all night, occasionally rising to check the kitchen. The footage was unromantic and ordinary, and that was exactly why it was true. He showed them the message he had sent at 12:47 in the morning to Irene Caldwell. The message named the situation, named his intention, asked for a witness. He had not asked for advice. He had asked for a record. Ice read the message twice. He looked at Vivian. This is not the behavior of a man trying to hide a child, he said. Vivian did not surrender. She lifted her phone and called her attorney. But while she spoke into it in clipped, professional sentences, something in her voice had changed. It was the brittle politeness of a woman who had begun, for the first time in years, to suspect that she had been wrong. Officer Brooks said there were no grounds to detain Silas. There was no abduction. There was no concealment. There was instead a man who had taken in a frightened teenager, kept her safe according to every reasonable rule, and intended to call for help at sunrise. Vivian's attorney, on the other end of the line, advised her to lower her voice. The room held a strange new balance. Vivian had money. Silas had evidence. Vivian had attorneys. Silas had the truth. Vivian had legal guardianship. Adelaide had a voice of her own. Gwen stood close to her father, still holding Milo. Silas rested one hand, lightly, on her shoulder. He felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt, at the very edge of the relief, a quiet refusal to be made small by anyone again. Officer Ice turned to Vivian and made one more request. He asked, professionally and without apology, that an independent advocate be brought in for Adelaide. Vivian objected. Ice did not move. She ran into the rain, he said. We need to know what she was running from, not just who she ran to. Callista Reed arrived within the hour. She was a tall, calm woman in navy blazer, an independent advocate licensed by the state to represent the interests of minors in family disputes. She did not introduce herself with titles. She simply asked, kindly, to speak with Adelaide alone. Vivian objected to that as well. She was not used to being asked to leave the room. She was used to being in the room. But Officer Hayes confirmed that the request was standard and necessary, and after a long, hard moment, Vivian stepped outside into the gray morning air and stood by the SUV, with her arms folded and her face turned away from the windows. In the booth at the back, Adelaide spoke more freely than she had spoken to anyone in 3 years. She said she had a phone, but the phone was always tracked. She said she had a driver, but the driver reported every stop. She said she had a therapist, but she had stopped trusting the room, because somehow her sister always seemed to know what she had said. She said her teachers were kind, but they were paid, and so they were not friends. She said she had asked, once, to attend a regular school, to walk into a bookstore alone. Each request had been measured for risk and image, and quietly refused. Callista asked her if she wanted to be cut off from her sister. No, Adelaide sighed. I love her. She is the only family I have left. That answer was the whole reason the case was a hard one. There was no monster in it. There was a frightened older sister and a suffocating younger one, and between them, an enormous house with too many doors and not enough air. When Calista summarized parts of the conversation to Vivian, with Adelaide's permission, Vivian's posture changed for the first time in any visible way. She had not prepared for them to be described back to her in her sister's words. After our father died, she said, finally, people came at her from everywhere. Reporters. So Kate's friends. Distant relatives looking for money. So I built a wall. I thought walls were what love looked like, when you cannot afford to lose anyone else. Calista did not argue. She only asked, very softly, while you were protecting Adelaide from the world, did you ever ask her if she was afraid of her own home? Vivian could not answer. It was Silas, leaning against the counter with a clean towel still folded in his hand, who spoke next. He spoke quietly, the way one speaks to a person on a ledge. I understand wanting to control everything after losing someone, he said. I used to run that night through my head every week. If I had called her sooner. If I had driven behind her. But controlling the past does not keep the people you still have any safer. Sometimes it just teaches them to stop telling you the truth. Vivian looked at him then, not as a suspect, not as a stranger, but as a man who had learned the same lesson she was finally being asked to learn. The first crack in her certainty was not loud. It did not need to be. After reviewing the camera footage, the severed message, Adelaide's testimony, and Callista's assessment, Officer Hayes stated, on the record, that there was no basis to charge Silas with abduction or unlawful detention. Walker's diner had functioned that night, exactly as he had said it had. Vivian did not relinquish her legal guardianship. She still loved her sister, and the law still recognized her. But Calista proposed a temporary arrangement. Adelaide would stay with an aunt, court approved, while a family services review reassessed the household conditions and the level of monitoring under which she had been living. Adelaide would have a voice in that review. When Adelaide and Vivian faced each other one last time, in the doorway of the diner, the wind had finally died. Are you really that afraid to come home? Vivian asked. I am afraid, Adelaide answered, of going home and being a version of me you can manage. Before Vivian left, she turned to Silas. She did not know how to apologize to a man she had nearly destroyed before breakfast. He did not insist that she try. Next time, he said, before you call a man a criminal, ask a child why she ran. Vivian walked out into the morning without speaking. Through the window, Gwen watched the SUV pull away. Does she hate Daddy? Gwen asked. Silas looked at the empty space where the SUV had been. No, he said. She is just afraid. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at Walker's diner. It was handwritten, in the careful slanted handwriting of a 15-year-old, who had finally been allowed to choose her own words. Adelaide wrote it that she was staying with her aunt, that the review was underway, that for the first time in 3 years a grown woman had asked her, in plain English, what she wanted. She thanked Silas for not turning her into a problem. She thanked him for not turning her into a story. She thanked him, most of all, for treating her like a person. That same week, Vivian came back to the diner. She came alone. No officers. No attorney. No driver waiting at the curb. She wore a cream-colored dress and a long coat, and her hair was loose, and her face looked tired in the honest way faces only look tired after they have stopped pretending. Silas poured her a cup of coffee without asking. I was wrong to call you a kidnapper, she said. He did not soften, but he did not harden either. You were wrong because you were afraid, he said. Those are not the same thing. She sat with that for a long time. She watched Gwen, in a back booth, coloring a picture of a house with too many windows. She understood finally that not everyone with less than her was waiting to take something from her. Before she left, she asked, quietly, if she could thank Gwen. Gwen came over with Milo in the crook of her arm. Vivian crouched. The chief executive did not crouch. The older sister did. She looked into the small face of the child who had 2 weeks earlier undone all her certainties with a single sentence. "Thank you," Vivian said, "for telling the truth." Gwen considered her seriously. Then she nodded. "Daddy says grown-ups need to hear the truth too." Silas, behind the counter, looked at his daughter, his eyes warm and a little wet. He did not say anything. Vivian rose. At the door, she paused. She turned back. "Do you still have any of that chicken soup?" she asked. "Yes," Silas said. "But I do not give it free to chief executives." For the first time, she smiled. It was very small. It was very real. "I will pay full price," she said. "And the tip." Outside, the morning was clear. The parking lot was dry. Somewhere down the road, a truck was downshifting for the long curve. Inside Walker's diner, a single father turned the small radio back on, and a woman who had once arrived with police officers sat down at the counter, and a 6-year-old went back to coloring her house, and the door, behind them all, was no longer locked against anyone.